So we want to create a system that will allow us to have random power-ups being dropped into the world when we destroy enemies. So sometimes we want them to appear, sometimes we don't, but all we know is we want a random chance of a power-up appearing within the world. So we're going to do that on our game manager script. So I'm going to open our scripts folder and open our game manager and give it a second. There we go, it should be here. So if we want our power-ups to drop randomly, well, first of all, we're going to need to know what power-ups do we want to drop. At the moment we only have one power-up in the game, but as we go a little bit further we're going to create a few more. So we're going to need to have a bunch of different power-up objects. So let's again create an array of objects. So we're going to create a public game object array that we're going to call power-ups. And then we also need to know what is the chance that a power-up gets activated, because we want it to randomly appear within the world. So we're going to basically pick a number between 0 and 100, and we're going to have it randomly pick and see if that number is greater than a randomly chosen number, and if it is, then we'll generate it, and if it isn't, we won't. That's basically how we're going to handle it. So we're going to create a public int called power-up chance. So how are we actually going to make these power-ups come into the world? Well, we're going to add a function down at the bottom of our game manager here. We're going to create a new public void that we'll call, say, drop power-up. And this is going to be called, basically anytime we destroy an enemy, we're going to call this script, and then this little bit of function is going to say, okay, let's decide if we should drop a power-up. And the way we'll decide that is just create an if statement, and we're going to say if random.range, so we're picking a random number between 0 and 100. So if any number between 0 and 100 is less than whatever our power-up chance is, so say we set our power-up chance to be 33. We'll pick a random number between 0 and 100, and if it's below 33, then we'll activate our power-up, and if it isn't, we'll do nothing. So it basically, we're creating a kind of percentage chance of our power-up appearing within the game. So if our power-up does get generated, well, then we got to pick a power-up to create into the world. Well, we know if we want to bring a power-up into the world, we want to instantiate it. So once we go to instantiate, we want to choose which object we're going to create. Now, we know if we scroll back up here, we just created an array of game objects that'll be our power-ups. So we want to pick from that array randomly which object should appear. I mean, at the moment we only have one object within an array, but imagine, say, we have 3 different power-ups that we can use in our game. So we want to randomly pick between 0 and 2, because we know that in our arrays, when we have 3 objects, that means they'll be at position 0, 1, and 2. So we want to pick between the numbers 0 and 2 and to choose to generate one of those power-ups. So what we're going to do is go into our power-ups array, power-ups, and then we have the number value that we're going to access. And the number value that we're going to access will just be chosen by a random range again. So random.range. And what we're going to set it to is it can be between 0 and whatever the length of our power-ups array is. So power-ups dot length. Okay, so we'll put our close bracket there. Now, before we move any further, there is one kind of question that you might have when we're talking about this. So say our power-ups length is 3. Say we have 3 objects in our array. So therefore our power-ups length will be 3, but we'll only have the positions 0, 1, and 2 available. So you might think, oh, we should put it in the range between 0 and power-ups length, say, -1. The only thing is, the way random range works is when you're using int values, which is what we're using for our random range in general, an int will only, in a random range, be, say if you picked your random range to be 0 and 50. When you're using int values, it'll only be it'll be any number between 0 and one less than 50. It will never actually include the top number. You can see it in the little summary we have here. When it says on the screen, it says summary returns a random integer number between minimum inclusive and maximum exclusive. So that means the minimum value will be included in the possible results, but the maximum number won't be. Now if you're using float values in your random range, so say this was random range between 0f and some other kind of number, our power-up's length is an int value, so it's by default set to be that. But if you were using float values, it would actually include the top number. So it would be, if you were again using 0 and 50, it would include the number 50 within that range. But when we're using ints, it doesn't include the top number, so that's why we set the top number to actually be 3, and then we know that the results that can come out of that are only 0, 1, or 2. And that works perfectly fine with our array, and it makes a lot more sense for what we're trying to do. So that's how we'll choose our random object, but now we have to decide where are we actually going to put this within the world. So to find that out, we're actually going to need to know where is the enemy within the world when it gets destroyed. Well, we know that this function that we're creating here, our drop power up function, this will be called when our enemies are killed. And what we can do is within the brackets here, we can add a value in here that we want to pass in. We've done this before for using int values and stuff like that, but now we're going to use a vector tree that we'll just call enemy position. So basically whenever we call this script, we're going to tell this function what our current enemy position is, and then in here we can say, okay, we know where the enemy position is, so we can just say enemy position is where we want to spawn the power up. And as for the rotation of it, what we can actually do is just keep it nice and simple and just create a new quaternion, which is the way we create rotations in Unity. As I said, quaternions are kind of confusing to get used to, but one easy thing to remember about quaternion is when you want to have no rotation, you can just put in 4 zeros like that. So new quaternion and 4 zeros, and that's the end of our little instantiate. So now what we're doing here is we're instantiating a randomly picked power up from our array, and we're going to put it at the position of the enemy at a rotation of 0, so it's absolutely perfectly normal and we can see it perfectly fine. Okay, so we've got this function built, but of course we need to actually call this whenever our enemies are destroyed. So let's go back to our bullet controller, which is destroying our enemies. So we have it instantiating an explosion at the moment, and we have it destroying the other object. And before it does that, what we're going to do is say we're going to search for our game manager. So we're going to say find object of type game manager. We're going to find the game manager within the world, and then on that script we're going to call that function we just created, which was drop power up. And then inside that drop power up function, we're going to say at this point our bullet has now collided with an enemy, so we know that the other thing that we just ran into is the enemy. So we can say other dot transform dot position. So basically what we're doing here is telling the game manager that when we drop the power up, the position we wanted to drop into is where our other enemy currently is. So we'll hit our semicolon there like that, and that's all we need to do for our power-ups. So we can pop back into the game, and now let's hook all that up in our game manager. And just while that's compiling down there, I just want to say the reason we do this find object of type game manager here and not just do it in the start function is because not every bullet is going to hit an enemy. So it doesn't need to know where the game, not every bullet needs to know where the game manager is, and that'll just take an extra bit of processing time while the game tries to find, hey, where's the game manager? So there's no point in doing it for every bullet that's created. We only want to do it in the specific case where our game manager is needed, and that's when we're destroying an enemy and trying to drop a new power up. So we've got it all compiled. Let's go to our game manager. We have no power ups in our array at the moment, so let's pop our new shield power in there like that. I'm going to delete the current shield power up from the scene. We go back to our game manager, and what's the chance that we'll drop an object? Well, at the moment I'm just going to set it to be 100, just so that we're guaranteed when we shoot an enemy that we can actually make sure that we're dropping an object. So let's go ahead and press play then. And we should see, as soon as one of them gets loaded in, I should shorten down that first load time. But there we go. That one drops shield. So did that one. They're all dropping shields just the way we want them to. So let's put that power up chance down a bit and see what happens then. Actually, hold on. Let me just stop this. Nope. Didn't want to stop. There we go. I'm going to shorten this down to 1 second while we're thinking of it here. Start going. There we go. Okay. See if I can destroy some of these guys. There we go. So we're not having much luck, but there we go. We got a random power up given to us. So now we have our shield activated in our game. So when we run with our shield into any of these objects, our shield gets destroyed, and so does the other object. But it's only when our player ship in particular runs into an object that it doesn't get destroyed. But there you go. We have our randomly power-ups popping into the world. So let's go ahead and make a couple of more power-ups that our players can use in the game.